Hi there. Um, I know what the video title looks like, but I do like books. I own some, so you may then ask yourself if I'm not somebody who's just enraged by the concept of glyphs inscribed on paper, what the heck am I talking about? What I'm talking about is this: the codex, the journal, the bestiary, the gosh dang frickin' files. They're not only bad for practical reasons, but for narrative reasons as well. So join me if you like pedantry, because today I want to make playing video games an even more embarrassing hobby. Let's complain about how video games would be better with less words. I have a rhetorical question for anyone who enjoys the codexes. How do you read them? Because the amount of screen space they actually use for the words versus the amount of space that ends up doing absolutely nothing is just out of control. The words are usually presented to the player in a way that makes them really inconvenient to read. There's an emphasis on the style of the presentation, especially in a way to make sure people constantly remember that what they're doing is a video game. And there's video game stuff over here and over there, and wow, boy, you're reading it, but it's in the game. It's a video game. I mean, look at this. I'm going to point to a bunch of examples now to illustrate my point. Did you know both God of War Ragnarok and its predecessor went to extreme lengths to make sure each game takes place in a single long camera cut? Except, if you ever want to read what Kratos thinks about hill giants or whatever, you better cut that camera and go into a menu and then squint really hard at a third of the screen. Oh boy! Does The Witcher 3 need a third of the screen devoted to a picture and another third devoted to a static menu? More like The Witcher 3, one third of the three parts of the screen is useful. Got him. Diablo 3 has audio logs, but if you want to read those words, oh boy, do I have some very, very tiny bad news for you. I'm glad Dragon Age Origins used about a fourth of the screen for their page, and I'm especially glad for this uniform blood texture. I must have been eating jelly in a really precise way to get this stain here. Look, I love Monster Train, but look at where they put the lore. Just look at it. Why is it attached to all of the cards? I bet you weren't expecting Yakuza in here, but not only is the space really, really tiny, but listen to what trying to read these sounds like. Wow, I'm glad Starfield is the most innovative game of the year according to Steam users because they really innovated on the journal by having it look exactly like all the other ones. Hades not only has logs, but you have to play the game a bunch to unlock various tiers of the same logs to get more info. Sorry, Hades actually sucks. The Last of Us 2 was game of the year. You know what other series I bet people weren't expecting to hear in this ramble? How about Dark Souls? How about Elden Ring? Well, guess what? Dark Souls 2 is better than all the other ones. I mean, Dark Souls attaches a journal to every single item in the game. And I can't blame the player who sees this and goes, no,
Sorry.
you, Miyazaki, I am not reading a pair of gloves to learn about how Rardran the Uncaffeinated died eons ago in a sad little ditch after succumbing to the dark roast. All right. That's enough about how terrible these things look. But another problem these games overwhelmingly suffer from is actually getting access to those words to begin with. It's not like you're just sitting down with a, comfy book and reading all this stuff. If you want to read the words you're being presented, you usually need to actually play a video game in between to get those words. I can't just sit down with Baldur's Gate 3 and read all the journals in the game. I have to play 100 hours of crap in between every dang journal entry. Personally, I can't stand the feeling of getting into the flow of a game just to break it up every 10 minutes with a little journal. And I would guess this is exactly why lore videos about a bunch of these games are so popular. You don't actually have to scour through the game's codexes or boxes or gauntlets or whatever to get the information yourself. Then, by the way, you often can't access these things easily or conveniently. A lot of these games bury these words that you've unlocked behind layers of menus and clicks. The alternative to this is some games will poke you with little pop-ups every time you get an entry for anything. So the books are like being thrown at your head in the middle of a cutscene, begging you to read them. Sometimes I'm talking about a video game and I'll mention a character seemed like they weren't fleshed out or a story beat seemed like it went nowhere. That's totally addressed, I may read in response to someone else, because this is a rhetorical framing device and I don't actually have these conversations. I'm inevitably confused until I find out the source of this information was locked inside the gosh dang heckin' journal. I'm absolutely hamming up all of my responses to this for fun. But this thing is the biggest crime committed by codexes and journals. Sometimes you're given information buried inside one of these things that is supposed to directly impact your experience with the game. For clarity, I don't mean games where reading is like the central thing. If it's like a puzzle game or that sort of thing where every piece of text is expected to influence your understanding, cool, that's great. I like that. The usability and accessibility complaints are still there, but I'm not being punished if I don't like that stuff. Let's take a look at Baldur's Gate 3. We're going to ignore how bad the reading UI is because we already went over that. Though, actually, I lied. Look at what it looks like in split screen on console. Let's instead look at something it does very well. It actually solves one of my complaints. When you read a book and it's related to something in the broader game, your character will have a voiced line about what was in the book right after you stop reading.
Abandon their host as soon as they need to. Vile parasites.
So it fishes out that context-critical information for you, which is great for illiterate schmucks like me because you can just smack the read button and immediately exit for the relevant information. But, I don't know, doesn't that still defeat the purpose a little bit? Like, why have so many useless books and a few non-useless ones?
Incomprehensible squiggles.
Where Baldur's Gate 3 solves one thing, it fails in another, more serious, I would say, way. Because the game tries to do a lot with representation, and usually it's great at that. Baldur's Gate 3 has one canonically trans character, but hides that revelation inside a very easy-to-miss journal, and nobody tells you what was inside that book when you finish reading. So are you actually winning any points for representing the trans community if the only entry is hidden inside a document somewhere? The characters don't actually talk about it explicitly. They talk about it in this sort of vague way that half implies they're talking about a cult instead of gender identity. It's a conversation shrouded in sort of vague misdirections. It's a metaphor, and it's easy to overlook. It's bafflingly impressive how much of Baldur's Gate 3's text is narrated or voice acted, but nobody could openly discuss being trans for even a minute? I don't know. Moving on to another example, let me get to one of the biggest one of these. We're going to dunk on game developer Ubisoft. Assassin's Creed is a well-regarded video game franchise in the industry, which is far more embarrassing for gamers than me saying we shouldn't read, and it specializes in setting games in the real-world past. As Creed is presented as alt history, but by way of showing you quote-unquote real events, with some fictionalized characters or elements added in. One of the big problems with this is you can't always tell what things are embellished or straight up changed for entertainment value. Like, we know our protagonist didn't really exist, but what about the events performed exclusively by real people? What about the way those real people act? Are those things fake? Assassin's Creed Unity is set during the French Revolution. The game casts Robespierre as a tyrannical villain and George Danton as a revolutionary hero. And these depictions are offered with little or no nuance. Except, then, their little journal entries say, well, actually, it's not that simple. Did you know Danton embezzled a bunch of money and Robespierre maybe had a couple good points? This isn't nuance. One of these things is presented cleanly to the player and it's impossible to miss, like it's fully animated and voice acted in a cutscene. The other is in a crappy series of menus beside the microtransactions everyone tries to pretend don't exist. Ubisoft has effectively weaponized the journal as part of their cowardly flirting with politics. They want to pretend there's nuanced commentary and real world politics in their games, but they try to push anything that isn't mainstream centrism into the fringes so nobody notices it's in there at all. But then if you critique them about it, they can say, no, it's totally in the game, you just gotta look in the journal. It's cowardice, plain and simple. Ubisoft sometimes does better by the fictional characters they make up for their stories. I made an analysis about the main character of Assassin's Creed Rogue a couple of years ago, and one of the comments I got a lot was, hey, you were wrong about this guy. If you only read the tie-in novel, it's revealed that etc., etc., etc. And that's cool. I don't mind the idea of extra backstory or additional characterization being included in content outside the game. My interpretation was sufficient to enjoy the story, and fans who wanted to read a tie-in novel gained extra backstory they could use to dunk on illiterate YouTubers. Codexes and journals and bestiaries are outside content too. They're not part of the game. They're books stapled onto the game in an ugly format, and they're best experienced by reading fan wikis or watching lore videos that do all the ugly, annoying, crappy work for you. They're smelly and bad, and I hate them. Most of them suck. Please stop adding them, and please read a book. Thank you for watching. Hi, here's the epilogue where I would beg for table scraps so I can do this for a living, but I haven't set up a Patreon yet as of recording. I should really get on that. But hey, if you like what I'm doing, just saying something about it to me or to a friend is already more than I could ask for, and it means a lot. Anyway, thank you. Bye-bye.